So I wanted to talk about this because I haven't really mentioned this in a long time. When I first came out as transgender, I came out as non-binary and asked that be called they, them, their pronouns. And that whole fucking argument, the whole grammar game just got so fucking exhausting that I was just like, fuck it. Just call me he. I did not really advocate for myself because of the simple fact that it was such an adjustment to try to get people to on board with the whole idea of transitioning. I don't know why, because here's the thing that still drives me crazy. Nobody really talks about this anymore, but I came out when I was 20 years old. It was 2010, and when I came out, I mostly cared about changing my appearance more so than dating women, at least to start off with. I associated my sexuality with my gender identity, and and in a lot of ways I think I will always, because so much of my adult years have been spent as a butch lesbian, and that was just what I was seen as. It was really strange when I decided to transition and people being shocked by that, because it was like, you've been calling me the man in my relationship for years. Why the fuck is it all of a sudden different just because I want to do hormones? Honestly, there's nothing else really that's different about me. I haven't tried to be a certain way. I haven't tried to really, I think sometimes I try to cut down on my feminine behaviors at work, but that's because I work in a warehouse and that's my shit. But I see myself along a non-binary way, in a sense of so let me put it this way. I've talked a lot about this. I've talked about this in tweets where I was living at a homeless shelter called the Healing Place, and it was the women's healing place that I was at. And I remember when I went through in 2012, it was just a standard to call the butch lesbians boy girls. And I liked that. I liked being seen that way. I liked playing up to that role because I identified with that role. But I also identified with a lot of the things that were female about myself, and I don't really know how to describe that. But if I were to, what I always was to the world as a butch lesbian, now just has hormones on top of it. I'm not saying that anybody else, because I haven't heard anybody talk about it like this out loud in public. I'm not saying that anybody who identifies as a butch lesbian is transgender. Hannah Gatsby has definitely made that very clear that she, and has addressed that. But I was, what she talks about in her stand-up is way more relatable. It's the same thing, and that's how I see myself. It's just that I wanted to be full on. I didn't want to be seen as a girl anymore at all, and I wanted more so to be, I wanted the things about myself that were innately masculine. Ever since for as long as I can remember, I was treated like one of the guys when I was growing up. I played with the boys. I got along with the boys. We had the similar interests. I didn't like makeup. I didn't like Barbies. I liked Hot Wheels. I liked sports. I liked, I had no problem doing, stupid fart jokes or anything like that. The things that you do with little boys, like my best friends in my neighborhood growing up were boys. So when I decided to, and I think I was as early as 10 that people started telling me I walked like a boy. Just with shoulders, and I'll really enhance that sometimes when I'm walking by myself downtown, but that's just how I've always been. And so it's very strange for me when I decided to add some hormones on top of that behavior that was already there and expression that was already there, that everybody freaked out. And to just really specifically, because as I got older, the more and more I got called she, the more and more it negatively impacted myself, and I don't really know how to explain it. I was 25 when I cut all my hair off. I was just going through a breakup at the time, and I cut all my hair off to do something different. And I can't even really explain to you how it's like a shirt that finally fit. You know, it's like just a well-tailored suit. And you, like, where you can stretch your, like, the measurements and the way that it's supposed to look is exactly right. And it fit. And it looked good on me, you know? But I remember, so I talk about the healing place, right? And I talk about, you know, to go back to what I was talking about earlier. So the healing place, when I go back again in 2015, I had relapsed, and I was on what's called a refocus contract. And at this point, you know, my hair is all short, and I've started to, you know, really embrace really embrace being seen as more so a guy than a girl, by strangers in public, that is. But I remember by the time I got there, it was considered an insult, and it was a slur for the butch lesbians, or those who identified as lesbian and would be considered butch, to be called a boy girl. And I remember being somewhat upset I remember actually being thoroughly upset. I was in my friend who I went through the program with in 2012. She was now one of the directors of the program. Oh no, she was in management. But I was mad. And because I wanted to be called a boy girl. I didn't find it offensive. I was like, what the fuck do you mean that's me? Like, and you're telling me that the way that I see myself is wrong. And I remember, fast forward a few years after that, it's 2017, I'm in my queer politics professor's office, and she's like, yeah, well, a lot of people would consider that offensive. And I was like, I mean, I related to both. I do relate to both. I do see myself in a lot of ways still that way. That way that I always would. It just added hormones on top of it. There's nothing else that had really changed about me. And she goes, well, that makes you even queerer. And and that's a longer story about. But I didn't advocate for myself enough, I don't think, when I came out last year about the they, them, there, the understanding or really identifying as non-binary. Because when I came out initially, that's what I went by. But I think at the time I wasn't really ready to have those kind of conversations with people, and I still really, my preferred pronouns, you could either say he, him, or they. You could use non-binary pronouns, the traditional they, them, there, or binary in the he, him, his, whatever. Just don't call me she. I just don't like it. It doesn't feel right. It feels like you are completely avoiding this. But I think that I wanted to do a video about non-binary identity because I've never really talked about it, and I think there's room for discussion on that.